Well, good morning, church. Hope you're doing well. It's a week before Christmas. How many people are totally done shopping? Everything's good to go. How many people are not done? Okay, a lot of us are not done. So we had our staff Christmas party last week, and I want to show you the picture of the person that won the Christmas sweater contest. This is Blair Horst. He works with transportation and technology, and this is a homemade Christmas sweater. It's got all these stockings. Each stocking represents a person on the staff, and so this is just a unique, wonderful sweater. Now, I really like the sweater, and then Blair said, I need you to come closer, Phil, and actually look at the middle of the sweater, and so I did, and the very center stocking has Scott and Josh's name, and there's a lump of coal in the stocking. So Blair just summarized how really the entire church feels right now. So thank you very much for that, Blair. Speaking of t-shirts, every few years we put out a Memorial Road t-shirt, and a lot of people get a hold of one of those. So that's coming very soon. Those are going to be available to purchase on January 1st, so you can see our new designs here. And I wanted to let you know that if you memorize all 20 verses that I challenged you to memorize this fall, then you can get that t-shirt for free. And so if you've kind of slacked off, you haven't really thought about those verses in a while, you got a few more weeks, cram it, just memorize those verses. It does make a difference when you hold those scriptures in your heart. Now, how exactly are we going to police whether or not you memorize these scriptures? We have a plan, and I'm not going to tell you that plan yet. We're going to reveal that plan on January 1st. But for now, a few more weeks, memorize those scriptures and know that those t-shirts are coming. So in the 1990s, there was this cruise ship in South America called the World Discoverer, and it was a luxurious cruise ship, German-built, beautifully designed, 76-cabin ship, traveled all over the southern hemisphere, even would make its way to Antarctica on occasion. You would be a person of privilege if you could ride on this particular ship. In the year 2000, this ship was approaching an island, and something went terribly wrong. There was a reef underwater that was uncharted by all the instruments, and so this ship struck the reef, and it couldn't get unstuck. In fact, all these other ships and rigs and equipment tried to come to its rescue and get the boat unstuck, but it just wouldn't dislodge from this reef, and so they decided to leave it there. And so now it's just a tourist attraction, and this boat, which was once glorious, now sits so close to the island it wanted to reach. When I saw this picture, I was really drawn to it. One of the reasons I was drawn to it is because this picture summarizes what's happening at the end of the Old Testament. This is a really accurate picture of what is happening to Israel. And the picture really tells a story. There was a plan. Obviously, you can tell this ship was built with design, with structure. It had direction, it had purpose. So there was a plan with this boat. Something went wrong. External and internal forces combined to bring this boat down, and the goal was not reached. There was a plan, something went wrong, the goal was not reached. This is the picture that we get at the end of the Old Testament. So all fall, we've been working through the big story of the Bible. We started really at the beginning of the fall. We started with all these questions about the Bible. What is the Bible? How do we get the Bible? How do you read the Bible? How do you deal with big questions like the Bible and science? And so we talked a lot about those questions. And then we talked about the first act of the creation, or of the biblical story, which is creation. What does it mean that God created the heavens and the earth? And what does it mean that He says it's good? And then we talked about the fall, and how when the serpent comes into the picture, he disrupts the created order, and he unravels God's good creation. And now there's brokenness in so many areas of the world. Inside ourselves, between human to human, there's a rupture between human beings and God, and there's even a rupture between human beings and the planet. So everything's broken. And then starting in Genesis 12, God launches this plan through Abraham and then through Israel to bless the world, to reverse the curse. And so for months now, we've been on this letter I. We've been telling the story of Israel. And so now we're at the end of the Old Testament, and it hasn't gone well. There was a plan. Something went horribly wrong, and the goal, it was not reached. And so next week, on December 25th, we're going to talk about the birth of Jesus. And so this week, in the final week of going through the Old Testament, what I want to do is I want to let Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, be our guide for what's going on at the end of the Old Testament as we look forward to the beginning of the New Testament. And so here's what I want you to think about as we move through the sermon today. That picture that was on the screen just a minute ago, not only is that a description of what's happening in the end of the Old Testament, it's also, in a sense, the story of your life, the story of my life. We all have things that we could say are wrong with our lives, but we also have things that are not wrong. We have things that are going really, really well. And so here's what I want you to be thinking about on a personal level as we work through several passages in the book of Isaiah. I want you to name your heartache. Like, what is it right now in your life that's just bringing you down? It's weighing your soul down. And then I also want you to name your hope. What's your heartache and what is your hope? So here's where I want to begin with Isaiah. Isaiah points out two main flaws in Israel that led to, metaphorically, their shipwreck. And so the first one we read about early in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 2. And this text is talking about Israel. And it's one of their big flaws, one of their big sins. So starting in verse 7 of Isaiah chapter 2, we read this. Their land is full of silver and gold. There is no end to their treasures. Their land is full of horses. There is no end to their chariots. Their land is full of idols. They bow down to the work of their hands, to what their fingers have made. So the first sin that led to Israel's downfall, according to Isaiah, would be idolatry. Now, if you've been with us this past year, I did an 8-week series on idolatry and how it is the root of everything that goes wrong in the biblical story. It's when we exchange the Creator for creation. And I want to remind you of one of the things that we talked about in that series earlier in the year. It's very easy to look at the Old Testament people and read these passages about idolatry and think to ourselves, well, they were so unsophisticated that they would actually worship a piece of wood or a piece of stone. But we're modern people, and we know that those really aren't anything. They're just pieces of wood or pieces of stone. And so it's really easy to have some, what C.S. Lewis would call, chronological snobbery when we think about Israel and their relationship to idols. But that is not what an idol exactly was back then. The statue represented an ideology, and that's what they were worshiping. So even in this text that I just read in Isaiah chapter 2, silver, gold, treasures, horses, and chariots are literally synonymous with idols. And so it's not the pieces of wood that they're worshiping, it's all the possessions and all the money. In other words, long before materialism became the God of America, it was the God of Israel. They worshiped it, and it led to their downfall. Now here's the second text, which reveals a second feature of Israel's downfall. Isaiah chapter 58. Israel comes before God and they have a complaint. They're not happy with God. They say, why have we fasted and you haven't seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you didn't notice? So they're mad. And the reason they're mad is because they've been fasting. They've regularly gone without food, and they're putting themselves before God. They're even practicing the Sabbath day. They're making their sacrifices. And they're wondering why God isn't holding up his end of the bargain. And it's easy to see, at least for me, why they'd be upset. I mean, do you fast? Do you know many Christians that fast? Some of you do, but for the most part, most Christians say, oh yeah, I'm so glad I don't have to fast. Jesus said that we don't really have to do that anymore. But people that do fast, we see as, wow, he's just a spiritual giant. That guy fasts. Or, wow, she fasts on a regular basis. She must be really close to God. So Israel is doing one of the practices that we today would say makes someone a really robust disciple. So they're doing that. Well, then God comes back to them and he says this. Is this the kind of fast I've chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? It's like God is not happy even though they are fasting. And when we read a text like this, because many Christians don't fast, it's hard to relate to this text, but it's easier to understand what God is saying to us today if you can think about fasting as worship. So is this the kind of worship I have chosen? Just a day for people to humble themselves. Verse 6, isn't this the kind of fasting that I have chosen? Or isn't this the kind of worship that I want? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke. To set the oppressed free and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? And when you see the naked, to clothe them and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? So there's so much like to talk about here, but basically what Israel has done is they have reduced God's law to a personal pious checklist. Did I fast this week? Did I observe Sabbath day this week? And God is saying, I don't want that. Like you've totally missed the point of what I've been wanting you to do this whole time. God's vision is not simply about personal piety. God's vision is about the renewal of the whole world. Like God doesn't want there to be hungry people. God doesn't want there to be sick people. God doesn't want there to be fractured families. And so He's called Israel to go forth and be the people that reverse all of these things from happening. And so I might call this one hollow worship. For us, it's when we reduce our faith to a checklist on Sundays rather than a daily walk with Christ. It's when we say, well, at least I went to church today, I'm good now. Well, at least I read my Bible today, okay, I'm good now. And of course those are good things, but it's almost like someone making their bed while the ship is sinking. Like there's a much bigger story in mind. God wants the whole world to be restored. He wants the hungry to be fed. And so when we are all about our checklists and not really about living this out the rest of the week, God says, I'm not going to respond to you. I'm upset with you because you're not fulfilling what I wanted you to be doing from the beginning. When you reduce faith to Sunday attendance instead of daily discipleship, you are missing out on the mission of God. And so these are the big two sins that Isaiah is putting forth that led to Israel's downfall. One is idolatry. Two would be hollow worship. Now, when you look at the book of Isaiah, it's a massive book. And in one sense, what Isaiah is doing is, if you imagine that this is the broken ship and this is the island they're about to reach. Back to the picture I showed you. So Isaiah can look this way and say, yeah, I can see the ship broke down and here's what led to the downfall. But then Isaiah can also turn and say, oh, but I see something else is coming. And let me tell you about this new thing. So Isaiah describes the heartache, but he can also describe the hope. And the text that I'm about to read to you is one of the most hopeful texts in the entire Bible. And so for those of you that you're struggling today, or you're having a hard week, or you're having trouble focusing, or you're stressed out, you're thinking about all the things you have to do this week, or you're thinking about the people that are not here with you, like this passage that I'm about to read to you, it is one just to let it sink in. It is such a great text from the Old Testament. Isaiah 65 is the clearest vision of hope in the entire Old Testament. I want to start in verse 17. Isaiah says, this is God speaking in Isaiah 65, verse 17. See, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. So when this new thing comes, the new heavens and the new earth, the things that happened before then, all the suffering and the pain, and for Israel, the sin and the idolatry and the hollow worship and all these bad things that have happened, they're not even going to be thought of in that day. And when you get to this point where you're entering into the new heavens and the new earth, all the problems of your life, you're not even going to think about them. Now, does that mean that they don't matter? No. Does that mean they're not significant? No. Does that mean they didn't exist? No. What it means is that the weight of glory of the new creation will simply dwarf the weight of your pain and your suffering and your problems. It's a statement about how magnificent this new world is actually going to be. Now, verse 19, be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create, for I will create Jerusalem to be a delight and its people a joy. Verse 20, never again will there be an infant who lives but a few days. So in this world, no children don't die. There are no abortions. There are no stillbirths. He goes on to say, there will also not be an old man who does not live out his years. So notice that both ends of the life spectrum, these age groups are treated with value and dignity and honor, and they flourish, which, as a side note, this should inform the mission of the church today. We should protect the life of the innocent, and we should honor the life of the elderly, because these are things we see in the vision of God's kingdom and the future kingdom which is coming. Verse 21, they will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat of their fruit. My chosen ones will long enjoy the work of their hands. This is a great verse for anybody who's ever tried to imagine eternity and then thought to themselves, that sounds like the most boring worship service ever. Like, I don't want to sit up there and sing song after song after song and have nothing to do. Like, a lot of people think about this. It's not going to be boring. There's going to be meaningful work in the new creation. Not the kind of work that drains you, or the kind of work where you get to the end of the day and you think, what did I do today? Does anything I do even matter? Like, that's not the kind of work we're talking about here. So a few weeks ago, I was in Honduras, and it was the day before graduation, and I was walking to this beautiful outdoor amphitheater, and I watched the people get it ready. Like, they were decorating this room, and it was a really pretty picture. There's a picture of the room, but there was a ladder that went up to the top of the ceiling, and there's a guy up there, and he was hanging all these ribbons, and there were people putting like ribbons on chairs, and there was just a lot of groups working, and there was laughter. Like, they enjoyed what they were doing. And there was a group of children on the side, and they were playing hide and go seek, and I just stopped and I watched for a while, and I thought, this is meaningful work. And they're not doing this because they have to. They're doing this because they have friends who have accomplished something, and therefore they want to serve these people. This is the kind of work that you can imagine in the new heavens and the new earth. It's something you want to do. It creates meaning, it creates wonder, it creates joy. Moving on, verse 25, this vision continues. The wolf and the lamb will feed together, and dust will be the serpent's food. So a few things to point out about this particular line. One, this line about the serpent, this is an allusion to Genesis 3. So in Genesis 3, the serpent comes along, and through his deception and through his lies, he unravels the good creation of God. But in Isaiah 65, we see that that's reversed. So all the things that happen to undo the world, to fracture the world, are somehow being put back together. And then this line about the wolf and the lamb lying down together tells us, in a sense, what this new world will be like. The ecological fracturing that we see in Genesis 3, where the ground is cursed because of the sin of Adam and Eve. Somehow that's put back together. And even animals which were enemies, they're together. There's no longer predator and prey in this beautiful new world. It makes me think of the show Planet Earth, and there's been lots of renditions of that over the years. I love watching that show or versions of that show because it just depicts the magnitude and the glory of creation. Well, imagine Planet Earth and the new creation. Like imagine a docu-series about the new heavens and the new earth. Like it's going to be truly mind-blowing. This is what we are looking forward to. And another verse to point out to you is verse 19, where God says, I love this, I will rejoice over Jerusalem. I will take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and of crying will be heard in it no more. Let that sink in, what this text is saying. Isaiah is pointing out that when we reach the island, like when there's the new heavens and the new earth, not only will you see lots of amazing things, but you're going to hear amazing things. In fact, he points out two things that we will hear. One thing we won't hear, and one thing we will hear. You will no longer hear the sound of crying. Not going to be there. No tears. And the thing you will hear is the voice of God singing. I will rejoice over you. Like the same voice that says, let there be light. And the same voice of the triune God in Jesus that we hear saying to Lazarus, come out of that tomb, that voice will be singing over his people, the inheritance, the saints like us being caught up together with him at the end. God's going to rejoice over us. Like every once in a while I watch the show The Voice, where the judges sit in their chairs and they push the button and the chair flips. And when I watch that show, I am pretty moved by the sound of the human voice. Like it's amazing what a human being can do when they sing well. Like I can be moved to tears through the sound of a human voice. I can be moved to laughter. I can be moved to joy simply through the sound of a beautiful human voice. What do you think it will be like to hear the voice of God singing? Like this is going to be a day to be remembered. God has promised that He is going to sing over you. You will be serenaded by the Creator. And so what does all this mean? What does all this mean for you? What does all this mean for me? Well, a lot of us, we're stuck on our ship. We feel the heartache. We feel the pain. Even this week, a lot of us like, I got a lot of things to do. I'm busy. The money's tight. I'm grieving over the person that's not going to be there. Like a lot of us are stuck in heartache. We're stuck with the idea that, yeah, something's wrong. But what Isaiah reminds us is that something is right as well. And so here's the main two questions I want you to answer today, and you can answer now in your own head, but sometime today I want you to answer this to someone in your Bible class, somebody at home, friend. What's your heartache? What's your hope? And so I'll go first and share just one or two of mine. So I have several heartaches, but this past week was just a hard week for a lot of different people. I have heartache over the passing of Joy McMillan. We also announced last week that Tyler Tidwell had passed away. There was a lot of heartache. It was a difficult week. I've talked with quite a few of you about, well, what does it mean that Scott is not going to be our worship minister anymore? And you've expressed heartache about that. And just like me, you're excited, like thrilled for Scott, thrilled for OC. That's good things. But there's heartache when it comes to transitions. And so we all have heartache, and those are a few of the things that give me heartache. But I also want you to know that I have hope. So one of the things that is, this is super small, but I just want to tell you, I am really excited about a new project that I want to help launch on January 8th. In fact, when we started this whole year, Listen to My Voice, this is one of the projects that me and a few other people dreamed up, and all fall, we haven't told you about it yet because we're really excited about what it might do for our church in the spring. So I have a lot of hope about our church family and our engagement with the Bible and what it's going to do in the spring. Another reason I have hope is because of a guy I got to re-meet recently. So backing up to 15 years ago, I used to take youth group trips to Honduras. And one of the places we would always serve at was a place called Jóvenes, and it's an orphanage. And so this orphanage pulls boys off the streets who have been abandoned, and they raise them. So there's several houses, there's house parents, and it's an incredible ministry. There are a lot of children who are abandoned in the country of Honduras. Sometimes it's because their parents die. Many times it's simply because the parents leave their kids on the side of the road to die. And so Jóvenes comes in and rescues these kids and raises them. And so there was a kid 13, 15 years ago named Luis that was there when I took youth group kids down to Honduras. And Luis never knew his parents. He always hoped that one day his parents would come back and get him, but his parents never came back and get him. In fact, later in his life, when he was a teenager, his older brother graduated out of Jóvenes and somehow made it to the U.S. And Luis's brother said, "Don't worry, I'm going to keep in contact with you, and eventually I'm going to come back, and I'm going to help you, and I'm going to rescue you." But after Luis's brother went to the U.S., Luis never heard from his brother again. And so Luis, his whole life, just time after time, has been abandoned. Well, I got to meet Luis again just 2 weeks ago, not as an 8-year-old boy, but as this 23-year-old man. Luis became the first graduate of Baxter Institute School of Preaching to have come from Jóvenes Boys Home. So the orphan has become the preacher. And he's actually going to go out. He's got this appointment to go preach at a church in Central America. And so you've got this guy who has this story of hopelessness, and yet he's been transformed by the power of Jesus, and now he gets to go be a proclaimer of hope. And I got to sit at a dinner with him one night, and we were trying to talk to each other. I don't know that much Spanish. He didn't know that much English, but we connected, and there was just something really beautiful about getting to meet this guy, and it gave me hope. Like, if he can do that, well, then I can get through my heartache. But here's the thing about hope that I want to leave you with today. Hope is something you have to hold for it to help. Like, for a lot of us, we treat hope like we do food we put in the freezer. We're like, yeah, I think I'm going to need this someday, so I'm going to stick it in the freezer. Food in the freezer has no benefit to you on a day-to-day basis. And for a lot of us, we've just tucked hope away. Oh, yeah, I need that someday, but I don't really want to think about it right now. No. Like, if you want hope to transform your life on a day-to-day basis, you have to hold it. Like, you got to hold your hope. Hope is like an infant. There's a lot of things that go into caring for an infant. But one of the simplest ways to make sure an infant is healthy is you have to hold the infant. Babies that are not held don't grow. You have to hold a baby for the baby to grow. You've got to hold your hope. You've got to hold your hope if you want your hope to grow. And so we need to talk about hope. We need to sing about hope. You need to pray in hope to your Father in heaven. Don't stick it in the freezer. Like hold on to your hope. Like, I know life's hard. That's why we have hope. In fact, one of the most famous passages in Isaiah is found in Isaiah chapter 40, and Scripture says this: "Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not grow faint." So notice what the person wants is strength. Like, I want to feel strong. Well, the way you get to that strength is you hope. Like, you hope in the Lord, and that's where the strength comes from. And so I know for a lot of you, this week really is going to be a difficult week for you. You've got so many things left to do on your list, and you're just stressed out right now, and you wish that you were just past Christmas. And for others of you, you really are starting to feel the weight of the grief of the people that are not going to be there in Christmas next week, and you want to be strong. All I'm saying is that if you want strength, you got to hold on to hope. When you hope in the Lord, you will find the strength to endure grief. You'll find the strength to endure the busyness. You'll find the strength just to endure the commercialism right now and surrounding the holidays. But you got to hope to have the strength. And so here's the last thing I want to say about the book of Isaiah. So on the one hand, Isaiah can look backwards and say, hey, here's everything that's messed up about Israel. Israel was living in idolatry. Israel practiced hollow worship, and it all fell apart. And then Isaiah can also look forward and say, hey, something better is coming. And I see this new world, and infants and the elderly will be blessed, and there's meaningful work, and the wolf and lamb will lie together, and then the curse is going to be reversed, and God's going to sing over us. Like Isaiah can see all that. So he's standing between these two worlds, the brokenness of Israel and the hope of the future. And here's the other thing Isaiah does. Isaiah realizes that Israel cannot get to this new world on its own. The ship really is broken. Israel cannot rescue itself. And so Isaiah writes, again, another famous line from Isaiah is this. We find it in chapter 9. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called, read these with me, he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Isaiah realized that Israel could not rescue themselves, and so therefore Isaiah pointed to somebody is coming. Do you know how many people died on the ship that didn't make it to the island? 0. And the reason that nobody died is because another boat came and rescued the passengers so that they could make it to safety. Israel could not rescue themselves. You cannot rescue yourself. I cannot rescue myself. We need Jesus. And so in this time of year, we anticipate the birth of Jesus, but we also anticipate the reality that Jesus is coming back, and He is going to rescue us. He's going to rescue this world. So I know a lot of us this week are going to put a lot of stock in the things that we have to do, and we're going to try really hard, but please realize our ultimate hope is not in what we can do. Our ultimate hope is in what Jesus Christ did and what He's going to do again. And so we're going to sing about that hope. And if there's something going on in your life today and you need the prayers of the church, you come tell me about that. And if you want to join this amazing story, which continues, by the way, next week, that the I is going to be the J, and we're going to start talking about Jesus, is if you want to join this story through baptism, you're welcome to come tell me about that as well. And we would love to celebrate that event in your life. Let's stand and let's sing.